So we're exploring how the world works through the prism of the consumer or the principal product our economy produces. Today I'm going to reappraise the wage slave, and if everybody is familiar that they don't want to be a wage slave, well, let's explore the way how we could rethink actually what's involved when if that is, let's say, a goal for majority of people. So obviously, in order for you to rationalise the price put on your labour, you ultimately have to be sold on the totalising claim of a buyer's journey. Ultimately, if you think the frame of reference for this is the transition or the journey of a child from the child being a dependent to becoming independent, because it's through that transition to be independent that they are given as credit instruments, or ultimately the bonded servitude that their parents have obviously endowed to them. And so if we don't look at wage labour in reference to that transition, then we'll never give context to transition and ultimately the way how that you could be the agent for change beyond obviously that bonded servitude. And so in that way, we're looking at that transition for you to become a credit instrument is the way how that you rationalise the price put on your labour to discount the production process of the consumer. So if you were to think that to be a wage slave, well, what would be, say, contra to that? What would be the alternative to a wage slave? Now that would be the entrepreneur, and that's the way how you sell, the making money, but through you having a sense of autonomy or freedom that comes around being your own boss. But are you your own boss when you legitimise the use of a credit you are not the originator of, because you're still orientated towards rationalising your actions as money making? That money making is in reference to the totalising claim of a buyer's journey that ultimately that your money making legitimises. And so if you get sold on the wage slave, and then ultimately the entrepreneur, what it does is it paints difference, but the difference is by degree and not kind, because even a entrepreneur produces themselves as the consumer that they're given as in order to rationalise the price put on their labour, because life is still that totalising claim of a buyer's journey. And so if it's the difference by degree but not kind, then ultimately what you can do is that you can orientate people from the wage slave that you are and think that somehow that this is an orientation towards a form of transcendence, which is ultimately not the case. But that's the way how it gets marketed as a progression, as say the way how that you would say actualize the self through having a sense of say autonomy, when you become your own boss. So when you frame the wage slave and the entrepreneur, obviously you combine them together because you discount. So everybody is given in the same way, as I always keep on saying, and so you'll sell yourself on your difference in reference to what you do, because through what you do, you disregard the production process of the consumer that is always transcendent to it. And this is the conceit that is sold when you go from the wage slave to the entrepreneur, because ultimately, if you are discounting the present in order to be orientated towards that future self, well, you're orientated towards the future self through the return that you generate, let's say. And so that return that you generate is obviously in reference to the life that you're ultimately shopping for. And so once again, it dislegitimizes the totalising claim of a buyer's journey, because it doesn't matter whether or not you're a wage slave or an entrepreneur, you can only demand. Your agency is reduced to demand, because you are the finished product. And it doesn't matter, like I said, what you do, what you produce through what you do is always transcendent. And so ultimately, if you produce yourself as a credit instrument or a demand center, that's the agency that you're credited. And so in that way, if you're credited that agency of demand, then obviously it legitimizes the use of money or the use of a credit you are not the originator of, and that's the way how you rationalize price that's put on your labor. And it doesn't matter whether or not it's you being a wage slave or an entrepreneur, it's exactly the same. So there is no transcendence in that progression. And because in that way, the way how you sell yourself on the progression is the value associated with it, with what you do. So it really doesn't matter that, if you actualize, let's say for instance that you have a job and it pays you a lot, well obviously it's in reference to the value that you contribute to the venture that obviously that you're engaged with. And so that venture could be your own, or that venture could be somebody else where you're an employee of that venture. Doesn't matter. That means to say that your value is in reference to your existential status, which is a demand center. And so ultimately, I've talked about the way how if you're taking the wage slave and then what you're marketing is the entrepreneur, and then the entrepreneur, one way of the entrepreneur is framed, especially within social media, is clout chasing whores or influencers. Well, influencers is in reference to the demand. And so it just reinforces the agency. And so therefore what you can see is that that orientation of that form of transcendence dislegitimizes basically the credit instrument that you will always be. You're not potentializing your actions, obviously, from economization to creativity, because you're orientated towards your life marginally. But then what you have the accoutrements of lifestyle to give the indication that that your social mobility or your intramundane transcendence is marketed as a plentitude of being. And that's why obviously you have all the fucking cars, all that shit, all that crap, the social proof of your transcendence in the eyes of other people. And so therefore what it's orientated towards is to legitimize the whole dream, the way how that you envisage life. So obviously the way how that you entrain your vision not to see what you externalize or what you discount when you can only ever demand. So it doesn't matter, you spiritualize your consumption, you can only demand, fucking more expensive shit. You're still a fucking consumer. You're still not credited creativity. And so this through this orientation, so wage slave, entrepreneur, ensures that what is externalized is your existential status, is the question of your existential status when you use a credit that you do not originate. Because ultimately through legitimizing its use, you allow your actions to be animated by a false transcendence or what is socially sanctioned, because you've got the games of status that kind of reinforce the worldview, and so therefore you can't look at life holistically, because how can you when you're always discounting? And so that logic, you have the return on investment, and it doesn't matter whether or not you're a wage slave or you're an entrepreneur, the return on the investment is the return on the investment of the asset that you are when you're a demand center or a credit instrument or the consumer. So we can say that to be a wage slave, if you are orientated towards not wanting to be a wage slave, but then feel that you want to actualize, say, a business for yourself, well, your business is predicated upon using money as a tool for thinking, which means to say that you're orientated towards life through discounting. So you cannot see life holistically, so you cannot see the significance of your actions or the potential of your actions to create a world that you would share with other people beyond the social proof of your transcendence. Now, if you can't fucking see that, then obviously the Tates of the world, or the aspirational branding around the brands of these influencers in inverted commas, then ultimately that you're just still a credit instrument. The grift is real. All they're going to do is monetize your aspirations. They're going to sell you fucking courses, and because then you can escape the matrix. But escaping the matrix, you don't escape anything. Ultimately, because you're not looking at your existential status when you're given as a credit instrument. So I thought this is just a brief way of understanding what is a wage slave and what the bonded servitude. The bonded servitude, when you're looking at a wage slave, just to finish, is not in reference to, well, it's in reference to the envisaging and the social mobility and obviously the social improvement, the social proof of what we would consider to be movement, but ultimately it's the way how that you bind each other together. That's your security bond, is our unavowed collectivism, of binding ourselves together in a mass. All right, so it's the only way that you can legitimize our virulent form of collectivism is if you bind all the buyers' journeys together, and they might be they're differentiated through the niches that are catered for the lifestyle visions that legitimise that buyer's journey. But the only thing that does is just legitimise the totalising claim of a buyer's journey for you not actually to question your existential status. And so therefore, that's what's sold to you. That's your North Star. Make of it what you will.